Hey there, there's Rick Stewart. In this video I want to call it Hiding the Pharaohs and who they are and where they came from. In this video I want to say, can we see? I did another video on can we see the Savior, what he looked like and where he came from. But can we see the ancient Egyptians? We're not talking the Egyptians from today. The Egyptians from 2500, 3000 BC, 2500 BC, 2000 BC, the time of Abraham about 2000 BC through to the time of Moses 1500 BC. Can we see them? Can we see what's right before our eyes? Or are we asleep? I like to refer to it as hiding God, because hiding God goes deep. And why is it important for the Egyptians to be a certain way in order to hide God? Because if we hide the Egyptians and who they are, then we can also hide the Hebrews or the sons of Jacob or Joseph that was sold into Egypt. We can hide who they are. We can hide who Abraham is, and we can make them into some other group so that we can hide the true Hebrews. It's kind of like finding Waldo. Can we find the true Hebrews, or can we find the true Egyptians? So in order to hide the people of Egypt, we basically have to hide the continent of Africa, because I think what you're all aware that Egypt is part of Africa, and the northern part of Africa, and it is the cradle of civilization. It's the oldest, great superpower that we're really aware of, after probably Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. And so hiding Pharaoh's true identity, the Pharaohs during this time of almost 2,000 years, hiding this is way before, of course this is way before the Savior's time. This is we're talking back Moses' time, Abraham's time, way back in the early part of the Bible. But hiding Pharaoh's true identity and the people that lived in Egypt. It wasn't called Egypt, of course, back then. We'll get that in a minute. But it's quite an accomplishment to hide a whole 2,000 years of history and who the people are. So before I get into the modern images of Egypt and Hollywood, which is pretty farcical, really, pretty sad. But anyway, before I get into those images, I want to look at some actual tomb walls and images of what the people. These are tombs from 3,000, 4,000 years ago. These are very ancient tombs, and the drawings and images on the wall, and see if we can see what people are in these images. Remember what continent Egypt or Kemet is in at this time, and it always still is. Egypt is still part of a certain continent, and there's a certain continent that has a certain type of people. Of course, there's many different groups of people within that continent, but if I were to show you an image of someone from that continent of Africa, you'd probably be able to pick out, you'd probably say, yeah, that person's from Africa. So what type of people do we find in the ancient tombs? So these, like I said, these are actual pictures from walls of the ancient tombs and some of the statuettes and statues that you find in the tombs. And it tells us a lot about these ancient people. So as you look at these, what race do you see? What comes to mind? It's certainly not Europeans, right? I mean, you might say that they look like Hindus or something, but what race comes to mind when you look at these wall murals? Even the slaves and the servants and the warriors and all the different levels of society, they all sort of have a certain hue to their skin. And so I would ask, do we see white Gentiles? I'm not saying that there weren't some white people, whitish, like Greek people from Greece and people from Spain or people from Europe that got down to Egypt. It was it's like coming to America, I suppose. Over the thousands of years they were there and ruling basically the world for a long time in that area. Of course, people came from all over, but most of those people came to the Delta area right near the Mediterranean coast. But be that as it may, yes, you're going to find the odd person that is a white-skinned person, right? Some of the scribes and some of the people that may have worked there. But of the pharaohs, none. I haven't been able to find any yet that I see as being from what we call a European background. So we're talking one of the oldest, longest living dynasties in the world, in Africa. and the fountain of civilization, really. So look at some of the facial features. Look at the nose. Look at the face, how the faces are. Compare them to European-looking faces or even Asian-looking faces. Look at the skin color. Look at the different types of hair, and look at what we expect. We're looking at people that lived in the continent of Africa. So do these images go along with what we would expect to find if, thousands of years ago in Africa? And in my opinion, yes it does, right? It fits right in. Before I go into what happened, that changed Egypt out over thousands of years, I want to quickly say, let's look at some of the Hollywood things, because to me that is really a classic, falsifying of history, which is, of course, what Hollywood does about so many things. But just look at the images. Just look at the images of these actors and actresses that have been chosen to play in pretty much all the roles of Egypt. Every Egyptian film I could sort of quickly look up. Definitely these are white people. At most there may be some Middle Eastern people. But what we don't see playing in these movies as any of the royalty or as any of the pharaohs, or you certainly do not see anyone that came from Africa or has African heritage. Think about the old Ten Commandments movie, and look at the actors and actresses that play the roles that we have grown up thinking of as Egypt, right? Of course, Moses is played by someone we can say, oh, Moses is a white guy in this movie. But what about everybody else around Moses? All the other people in Egypt, the mother that raised him, the Egyptian mother that adopted him or took Moses in and raised him. Look at who they are, and can we see that there's a problem there, in Hollywood, right? And how they're portraying these people. Think about it. Do they even slightly resemble what we see on the walls? I'll show you a few more of those images of the walls of the tombs from 4,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago. And then if we think that Hollywood is interesting in their interpretation, look at the toys. Here's some pictures of some toys you can get for figurines and toys to depict Egypt. And then what about posters and book covers and books? What do they all have in common as well? Can we see the theme? There's a theme here going all the way through Hollywood, through the toys, through the posters, and even, sadly, if you look at the respected museums around the world and how they portray Egypt in their pictures on the front of their websites and here and there, generally speaking, I'm not saying all, but generally speaking, it's definitely pushing the same type of image that Hollywood pushes. And that, to me, is really, really sad, because it's just history, and if the blacks or the Negroes, or what do we want to call it, the sons of Mizraim, the sons of Ham, if they were the top civilization in the world with all the inventions and things that they did, then great, good for them. What does it matter? They don't have to be a white guy or white girl to come up with have the best geniuses in the world. But I know that if we look at especially the history over the last few hundred years, that wouldn't fly. So there's been a definite push to degrade certain races and up other races. But we have been programmed. We can't see it. Okay? We can't see it, but we have been programmed to see what they want us to see. And it's like in the Matrix movie, right? And, the red pill, blue pill, and all that kind of thing. But he's, when Morpheus is explaining to him about Neo still hasn't seen the real world yet. He's still sitting in the world that he knows, and Morpheus is going, I can't. There's no way that I can show you how much you're in the Matrix. You actually have to go and see it yourself with your own eyes, right? And I think it's the same for us. Once we start looking at these things and try to get rid of our programming or our racism or whatever it is that holds us back from seeing and actually look at the figures, look at the pharaohs, look at the caves, look at the things, and see, look at the continent and see what are those people and who were they that ruled the world in that day. But it is so hard for us to unsee. We have been very matrixed, and I think it's like in the Star Wars show, the matrix is strong with this one. And so all I encourage is that the reason I did this video is not so much that I'm an expert on anything to do with Egypt. I'm not at all. And I'm going to show some clips from some other people that are expert or have studied this much, much more in a few minutes in this video. But I wanted to bring it up just so I could, because I'm more interested in the history side of the Bible, and I want to go there with the Hebrew people next in my next video. But I want to talk about, it's very important that we understand who the people living in Egypt were and what they looked like, so that we can then start to understand who the Hebrews were, or the sons of Jacob, and what they might have looked like in those days. So the first video I want to show here is by a fellow Mr. Imhotep, Imhotep, and he's on YouTube. He's got lots and lots and lots of great videos on the issue of Egypt and those type of things. Another one I'll do after that is called Without History, and the third one is called Know Thyself. And all of these three have multiple videos about, so I'm just going to take a few clips here and put them in, and I'd love you to go and watch their work. It's much better than mine. I'm only commenting on my comments. They've actually gone and studied out. They'll give you the DNA evidence. They'll give you the the whole rationale of what really happened in much greater detail and depth. Mr. Imhotep, Imhotep.
I looked and found all these pieces. People tend to use them as evidence. And that's true. There are many statues of ancient Egyptians that are entirely white. But here is the issue: that's not their original state. This issue actually concerns all the art of antiquity, especially in ancient Greece and Rome. Their statues were originally painted, but they have been whitewashed later. But let's go back to our topic. Let's take this statue for example. It's clearly white, right? But when we zoom in, here's what we see. Do you notice these traces of dark brown pigments? These are traces of its original hue. This statue wasn't originally white. It lost its color with time. Here are other examples. You can see the same issue. So, basically, the Kemites never depicted themselves white-skinned. While doing my research, we've all heard of the so-called black pharaohs from Cush. These pharaohs are presented as the only black pharaohs, as if the others were not black. The problem is that as soon as we really start studying Kemet in depth, it becomes obvious that there have never been any indigenous white pharaohs, despite what we've been told. However, when looking at ancient Egyptian art, it's obvious that a great majority, if not all, of the pharaohs and the majority of their people were dark-skinned, and I can support that statement with these images. Here we see that the ancient Egyptians sculpted their rulers in stone, and they sculpted black and dark-skinned people. We can all see it. So, most people live in an illusion that ancient Egyptians were white or at least not black. The army evidence. Here is a depiction of the Egyptian army during the Middle Kingdom, before invasions and mass migrations. The country was still mainly indigenous. Does it appear multi-ethnic to you? No. All the soldiers depicted are black men with afros. If it were such a melting pot, one would expect to see whites, Indians, Arabs, etc. But that's not the case. Only black African men with beautiful afros. Now, let's look at these beautiful palettes from Kemet's early days. On the left, it is the palette of Narmer, which is well known. It depicts the Kemites taming a serpopard, symbolizing chaos. This suggests that the indigenous people successfully conquered the entire territory. The men depicted represent the natives and the elite of the country. This is another palette from around the same period. It is called the battlefield palette, representing the defeat of the enemies of the southern pharaoh and their capture. So, these men represent the indigenous inhabitants of the Delta region. If you look carefully, you will notice that on both depictions, the men share a similar phenotype with a little twist. Both the victorious Upper Egyptians and the defeated Lower Egyptians have afro hair, meaning that a big portion of the Egyptian population was black. In other words, we have black people in the south and black people in the north. Keep in mind that all of these palettes Lower Egyptians have afro hair. All of them. Once again, there is a lack of racial diversity, which makes a very strong statement.
It's called Without History.
Very interesting genetic studies that are starting to emerge that clearly show an African origin of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. These recent studies, seldom publicized, show without a shadow of a doubt that the ancient Egyptians Kemetu were closely related to modern-day West and Central Africans, and by extension African Americans. In fact, they show that African Americans are more closely related to the ancient Egyptians than the Irish descendants are to the Greeks and the Romans. The picture that is starting to emerge from all these research publications is that Africans were at the root of this latest instance of human civilization. They then spread it to the four corners of the globe. There are a few researchers in the community who are bringing a level of rigor to the field that is helping uncover many of these hidden scientific and historical discoveries. Camgiverse frequently covers emerging scientific data on the subject. Mr. Theory covers lesser-known depictions of Africans in ancient and medieval times. And lastly, King's Monologue specializes in facial reconstructions of key Kemetic figures. Do check out their work. I cannot recommend them enough. When you Google Ancient Egypt genetic studies, you are overwhelmingly bombarded with the results and interpretation of this study, the Abu Sir el-Malik paper, commissioned by Dr. Hawass. But this study is completely flawed. Here is why. Number one, it does not deal with ancient Egypt at all, as the period covered was a period in which Kemet had already ended. Number two, the location of these mummies is at the frontier and not at the core of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. Number three, the sample size is dubious at best, or indicative of data manipulation at worst, which would be in line with the whole spirit of the study. In fact, this study and its conclusion are as accurate as saying that Native Americans had European DNA by selecting DNA from New York from 1600 to 1900. A recent study was done and determined that both Ramses II, also called Ramesses the Great, and Ramses III had the haplogroup E1b1a. The haplogroup E1b1a is of great importance as it is very prevalent in Black Africa. In fact, here is a map of the concentration of this haplogroup. When you look at the origins of E1b1a and its dispersal patterns, it shows that it comes from Eastern Africa and then moves to ancient Egypt before coming back down to West and Central Africa. This is an important factor that I want you to remember because it will come back many times throughout this video study. Note that E1b1a is often referred to as M2, so haplogroup E1b1a is the most common haplogroup in Africa. That research happened to find out that Ramses III and Ramses II both had the Black African haplogroup E1b1a. So you can imagine their surprise when the results showed that Ramesses III was indeed Ramses II's son and that they were both Black African. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that if you saw Ramses II walking down the streets in the US today, you would classify him as an African American.
And the third one is called Know Thyself.
I've no doubt in my mind that this is a fake, a copy, a phony.
During the Second Reich, the Germans were coming about with a philosophy to justify further expansion, colonialism and imperialism. And in an attempt to do that, they claimed to be the discoverers of many sets of different artifacts, one of them being this head. But in fact, what it was something created at the time or just afterwards to justify their ideas of colonialism and imperialism.
But this was far from an isolated incident. In 2018, paleo artist Elizabeth Days unveiled a facial reconstruction based on the fraudulent Nefertiti bust, which further Europeanized her features. And in 2005, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, announced the results of a digital reconstruction of the face of Queen Nefertiti's son, King Tutankhamun. However, the relief on the back of his royal throne of him and his wife, Queen Ankhesenamun, shows a dark brown skin tone and features that resemble populations found in modern-day Sudan and the Horn of Africa. With discrepancies so glaringly obvious, one has to wonder what other liberties have been taken behind closed doors. A concerted effort has also been made in Hollywood to whitewash ancient Kemet. Television and film have promoted the idea of a European Egypt for decades. But when we look at the temple walls, we see a melanated population with a variety of skin tones and hairstyles, such as afros, waves, braids, and locks. Indeed, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and translation of the ancient hieroglyphs, originally known as Medu Neter, made Western scholars rethink their narrative. The newly transcribed inscriptions revealed an advanced culture that had attained an exceptionally high level of development. They coined the term Sub-Saharan Africa as a way to separate the genius of Egypt from the rest of the continent.
These presenters that I've given you have multiple videos, as I said, on ancient Egypt, on the Kemet topic, or on the Mizraim, or on this whole civilization, this huge civilization. I don't really want to get into the history that much. I think those other presenters do a much better job than I would. But I just want to say that one of the reasons, or the main reason, that we see this huge movement from Africa and black pharaohs and black people living in Egypt through to what we have today is a combination of many takeovers and conquering, mainly starting with Greece under Alexander, then through the Roman period, but then the major push to change the populace of the people was the coming in of the Arabs, and that's basically what the country is now, is an Arab country, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's what it is, but it is not the same people that we see in all these pictures I've been showing you today. It's a very different people, and yet they've inherited the monuments, they've inherited the Egyptian ruins, but they are not, as you can see from these pictures, they are not the same people as the people that originally were there 2, 3, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Anyway, I think that's probably true for most of the world, but anyway, for Egypt, which we're discussing tonight, I think it's important just to acknowledge that. I picked these three because I enjoyed their videos, and I'm sure that there's others, and if there's others, you can please put them in the comment section below. But let me just say that for me, when I see anyone pushing a white agenda for Africa, from 1000, 2000 BC, 3000 BC, when I see people saying, oh yeah, they were white, or they were from Europe, or they were from the Middle East, then to me that person has a motive of why they're saying that. They're trying to get me to follow a narrative that they are trying to push. And I don't know what their agenda is. It doesn't really matter. But for me, I turn it off. I'm not interested in that. I just want someone to tell me, even if someone's wrong, but if they're really trying to tell me what they have found out and it turns out to be wrong, that's fine too. But if someone's trying to deceive me and I can get that feeling from the video, then that really bothers me, and then that's enough for me. There's a fair amount of videos out there that are being put out by people that are trying to hide away the truth on almost every subject. And so for you or me or all of us to go out and find a good video presenter and find something that rings to have the truth, or some of it, or at least they seem to, then that's worth gold to me. And I think, try to find those people as much as you can. I'll leave as I said, the 3 references down below that you can go find their channels. But to me, again, like I said, it's all about hiding God. Because if you can hide who the true Egyptians really were in the Bible and what they looked like, then you can also hide the Hebrews and what they looked like and make us believe in a different kind of Hebrew that looks European versus a Hebrew that looks like they would have looked in their day. Anyway, thanks for watching this, and have a great day.